Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my computer. I wanted to make a short video today about something I figured out about the ATR72 from Asobo. I flew an approach the other day. I've flown a couple in the last few days where the distances, well, let me explain it a little differently, where I either came in really low or I came in really high. I am not the best pilot in the world. I'm also not the worst pilot in the world. And the first one was laziness. It was just, it was a combination of laziness and this problem I'm about to describe. The second one was into Robinson on Trinidad. If you see that video, it's very recently posted, I think yesterday. I was doing everything I could to account for the problem and resolve it. And hopefully then I was going to feel like, okay, I've got this figured out and now I know how to fly approaches in this airplane. Well, so the first one was really low and the second one was really high. And so I was like, okay, well, what is going on here? So what I did is I came back here to a video of me flying the PMDG 737-800 into Piarco, and then I found a video of me flying the ATR into Piarco on the same approach. It's the RNAV 10 approach. It's this one right here, and if you look and see here, we're coming up to Talus, 0.6 miles from Talus. Talus is right here. And in the Piarco video, I got, there are some challenges to flying, thinking, and talking at the same time, at least for somebody of my level of intelligence and intellect. And sometimes, it's like you're trying to, especially like I had this realization as I was making this approach into Trinidad, into Tobago, and I was like grasping what was happening in real time, but it just took some thinking, and I kind of goofed. I got it wrong. What I talked about in the video. So this 5.1 right here is the distance from Talus to the threshold of the runway, to the threshold of runway 10. So when you hit Talus, when you cross Talus, you are 5.1 nautical miles from the runway threshold. So let's take a look at the 737 video, and you're going to hear me yapping as we're going. So here you can see it counting down 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, and then you see it switch right there. Now when you see it switch, set this up to 4100, it goes to 0.2 and then immediately to, I think it's 5.4. See, 0.2, then 5.4, 5.3 really, right? And I think the reason it does that, I'll explain this here in a second. Let's get to 5.1, which is what it should be. Now you can see the nose of the airplane on the MFD here is right on Talus here at 5.1. So I think what happens is it's 0.3, 0.2, and then instead of going 0.1, 0.0 and switching over, it just switches over to a little bit short of what the distance to Talus is. So we're actually not at Talus yet. We're at 0.2 miles from Talus because there was still 0.2 remaining on the countdown, so to speak, as we flipped over, right? So there's 5.1. 5.1 all works out, right? Let's go over to the ATR, and you can see here 0.3. It's a little dark, unfortunately. The displays in the ATR are a little bit dark, and actually, there's probably a display adjustment I just realized that I can use to fix that. But you can see 0.3 to Talus. Now let's watch what happens in the ATR. 0.3, 0.2. 0.1, 0.0, which is what we should have gotten in the 737, but it clicks over a little bit early. Now watch this. Look at that. See that right there? 5.9 at Talus. Not 5.1, 5.9. So that's 0.8 miles off, which on an approach, I mean, that's 5,000 feet, you know. So let's go back over here, and let's look at the taxi chart and see if we can figure out what the difference is. All right, so we got a 10,000 foot runway, right? So if you've got a 5,000 foot difference, a 0.9 mile difference, you're off by 9/10 of a mile. You're going to be halfway down the runway rather than at the threshold, which is, not ideal. So what could this, what could the cause of this problem be? Well, the cause of the problem is right here. ARP, Airport Reference Point. Now, the Airport Reference Point I've talked about in other videos is simply a point on the runway, or a point on the airfield, excuse me, that they select, which is where according to the GPS, the airport is. Because you can't have this be the airport. I mean, there has to be a specific point for the GPS systems to calculate your distance from the airport, right? And that's what it is, the airport reference point. They also use that for minimum safe altitudes around the airfield. But in this particular case, in our little discussion here, this is where they measure the distance to on the GPS. Now, in an approach plate, they're measuring the distance to the runway threshold. This is what we're talking about here, 5.1, 5.1 to the runway threshold, runway 10, 5.1, right? Come over here. And so we know on the ATR we're 5.9 at Talus, and on the 737 we're 5.1 at Talus. So where is that 0.8 of a mile difference coming from? Well, it's coming from this, the airport reference point. Now, it's supposed to, the systems are supposed to be measuring the distance to the threshold, which the PMDG 737 is doing correctly. The ATR from Asobo is measuring the distance to the airport reference point on the approach, which is obviously incorrect. Now you've got 10,500 feet. It's roughly 2 miles. It's a little bit under 2 miles, and this airport reference point is roughly halfway down the runway. Let's call it 1.9 miles the runway. What's half of that? 0.9, give or take, right? So we got about a 0.9 mile stretch of runway here. Well, here we are 5.1. Here we are 5.9. That's 0.8 miles. That's roughly this distance. So the short story is, in the ATR, in order to get your distance to the threshold correct on RNAV approaches, I don't know about ILS approaches. I haven't had a chance to look at a couple of those yet. I haven't really flown many ILS approaches in the ATR anyway, so I don't know if I have a video to compare. But in RNAV approaches, what you're going to have to do, now visually, this is, you can use the PAPIs. For those of you flying the ATR in instrument conditions, this is a whole different ballgame, because in order to get your glide slope correct and your distance correct, now the reason it matters is because you get these references here, distance to threshold, and it gives you an altitude, 5 miles, 1680, 4 miles, 1360, 3, 1040, 2, 720, and then the runway. So I was using these on my approach into Robinson on Tobago, and you see the approach right here. RNAV 11 gives you these distances. Well, I was at 1040 at 3 miles. what was indicated as 3 miles, but if you come here and look at the taxi chart, it was giving me the distance to the airport reference point. 9,000 feet, figure it's, 1.8 miles, whatever. We don't have to be that precise. But I was this distance off in my, in my calculations because, you always want backups for backups, right? I mean, you've got the symbol on let's look at the ATR. You've got the distance measurement right here. You've also got you can barely see the magenta square here for the vertical guidance. You don't want to just stare at this and assume it's correct. I mean, it should be correct, but in the ATR, it's been all over the place, which is why I started trying to figure out, okay, if I can't trust this, what can I trust? And the easy answer for me was what I can trust is these distances and these altitudes, because I am flying visually most of the time on an approach in the ATR anyway. So I was kind of using this as a check on, my approach to make sure I was coming in at, approximately the correct altitudes. And of course I wasn't. I wound up very, very high on the approach. And the reason is because I was this distance closer to the threshold of the runway than I thought than the system was telling me I was. So again, if you're a mile off on an approach in terms of distance, that's a big difference. And so the solution is going to be the temporary solution. Let's see, come on, give me this back. Where are we? The solution is going to be when you're flying an RNAV approach and it says 5.1, you're basically going to have to go to your airport taxi chart, your airport chart, find the airport reference point, eyeball, what percentage of the runway length it is, figure out how many miles it is or how many tenths of a mile it is, depending on how long the runway is, and then subtract that distance, this distance here, from what the ATR tells you on the last point of the approach. Now, it's only the last point of the approach because, or the last waypoint on the approach plate. So the last waypoint on the approach plate here is Thales, right? And then there's a waypoint runway 10. So what happens is it sequences you from one waypoint to the other. So you come to NAPCO. Once you hit NAPCO, you've got 3 nautical miles to 3.0 Lexor. This is another waypoint. It doesn't have a name, but so you hit NAPCO, you're going to get a 3-mile indication. You hit this waypoint here, you're going to get another 3-mile indication. You turn final here at Lexor, you're going to get a 5-mile indication on the display. Right here, it's going to say Thales 5 miles when you turn. As a matter of fact, let's go and look at that. Turning final. Yes. All right. Micro traffic. Eagle Flight 559. There's see this? There's Thales 5 miles. So that's correct. Turning a 10-mile final. Right? See us right there at Lexor. Thales 4.9 miles. So it's correct all the way down to Thales. And then once we hit Thales, 0.2, 0.1, 0.0, flaps full. And then runway 10 is the next waypoint, RW10, 5.9. So in order to fly it correctly, what you're going to have to do is whatever the last waypoint is before the runway waypoint on an RNAV approach, you're going to have to, obviously ahead of time, go to the taxi chart, go to the runway, the airport information chart, find the ARP, halfway down the runway, half of this, what's that distance in miles, give or take, and then once you hit that waypoint, you have to subtract that distance from here. So instead of 5.9, you're going to have to say to yourself 5.1.
Disengage the autopilot.
Which is, you know,
and we are flying, baby.
it is what it is.
So
Let's come down here to short final, and I'll show you what the result is.
Gosh, I love hand flying this airplane.
All right, so we're approximately over the threshold, right? What does this say? 0.9, 0.8, one of the two. I can't really see. I hope you guys can see. So 0.8 off because it's measuring to the airport reference point, which is up here. Now, if we go to the 737, which does it correctly,
flaps fit.
Glide slow.
Now it's going to sequence to the missed approach point here really quickly.
100.
See, it just sequenced to the missed approach. But what we can do is just come back here a little bit. So there's the runway 10 waypoint. 0.2, you can figure we're pretty much, 0.2 from the threshold of the runway. So once we cross over this, it's going to be 0, which is correct. And in the ATR, when you cross over this, it's 0.8. And that 0.8 is this. So, what is this? The solution is, mental math as you're flying, which, is just another fun thing to add while you're trying to fly an approach. It's obviously not ideal. If I were able to, I would report this to the Asobo team in the Microsoft forum, the official Microsoft Flight Simulator forums, but I cannot do that because, as I have previously mentioned, I have been thrown out of the Microsoft Flight Simulator forums. And you may wonder why such a friendly fella as myself got thrown out. Was basically early on in this, they had there's kind of a lot of shenanigans that go on in their forums, and people would post these stupid clickbait titles and or insult other people and whatnot, and I would call them out for it, and I would flag it to the moderators, and it got to the point where the moderators just got sick of hearing from me. And I wasn't causing a ruckus. I wasn't insulting back, but I would call people out for example, somebody who didn't know something, and somebody would, make a crack about them, and I would respond. I'd say, look, just because you know it doesn't mean everybody knows it, and don't be a bozo, basically. Or I'd flag thread titles that were just ridiculous, that didn't give any description to what, just clickbait thread titles, and they're, per the terms of service, they're not supposed to, you're not supposed to do that. And so I would flag those things to the moderators, and they just eventually got sick of it. And instead of throwing people out who were causing a problem, they threw me out for trying to solve the problem. So whatever. It's unfortunate. I can't report this. I'm going to report it to Zendesk. I would rather bring it up in the forum. If anybody watching this would care to bring this up in the official forums and send this video, that would be lovely. If not, I hope that this rambling description of the issue is helpful to you guys, and that you're able to fly the ATR better. My next ATR video, which hopefully will be today, I am going to fly an RNAV approach, and I will take this into account. Now, the other funny thing, one last point before I kill this video. Now, this is pretty basic, right? ARP is right there. Pretty easy to kind of figure this is give or take a mile, right? Because the ARP is right on the runway. Let's look at Miami International Airport, for example. And let's look at the taxi chart, and let's imagine that you're flying into Miami. First of all, 1, 2, 3, 4 runways. So, the chances of the ARP, being on the runway that you're flying into and giving you a very easy indication for how to, do your math calculations is, well, 25%, I suppose, 1 in 4. Um, the ARP is right here. This is the airport reference point. So if you are flying into Miami on any of these runways, except for possibly 1230, it really doesn't help you at all. If you're flying into runway 9 in Miami, let's say in the ATR, and you're trying to figure this out, and you get, like, in the Caribbean, you don't usually get IFR. You may very well get IFR conditions coming into Miami, and now you've got to do this mental math to figure out where the runway is. Thank God it's 13,000 feet long, and even if you are a mile off, you've still got plenty of runway to land. But you know, using the method that I've just described to you in Miami is not really going to work all that well because the airport reference point is up here. There's other airports. I mean, I would venture to guess San Juan is probably a similar situation. Let's have a quick look. Yeah, ARP is right here. I mean, I guess you can sort of guess that it's about, halfway down each runway. And I'll show you the other thing that the ARP is used for. Hopefully they have it. Nah. So they're not using the ARP on any of these. Maybe they do it in Miami. Let's look at an RNAV approach. No. Anyway, that's the problem. That's the solution, sort of, the solution that's available to us. I hope this video is of help to somebody, and I hope you guys are having a great weekend.